Hi, my name is Helge Maus from pixeltrain. In this tutorial, I want to talk about setting cameras inside of Blender and managing them. So for this purpose, I've opened a really simple example scene, and you may notice that I've deleted my cameras here out of the outliner. So let's add a new one. We can go here to the Add menu if you like, set here camera, or you use the keyboard shortcut Shift A to add a camera. Okay, here it is. And it normally always starts here where the 3D cursor is. If I now press the G key to grab it and move it somewhere, you will see this camera symbol here. If you want, you can scale it with the S key. So it's a matter of your taste, how big your cameras are in the scene. And the next question normally is how to look through the camera. Since Blender 2.8, we have a camera switch icon here in the viewport, so it looks like a camera. And if you click here, you always switch into the active camera. So the first question we have is, what is an active camera? So let's add another camera. So Shift A again, we make another camera here and grab it and move it somewhere else. And I name them by double clicking here in the outliner. This is shot camera 01 and this camera here is shot camera 02. Okay. If you compare now these two cameras, you will see that this camera here, which I highlight in the moment, has a triangle which is filled. If I select this camera here, you see that this triangle is not filled. So this camera here is the active camera and this is not active. So if you now want to switch into a camera, you will see that we always switch into the camera which is active, so has the filled icon here. So let's switch here to a better viewport layout, and I go here into the camera that you see that. So if you grab now this camera here, take your move tool, you see, yeah, that's exactly this camera here. But what if I want to have this camera here active? Where's the active camera stored? If you look to the right side here into your properties, there's a scene properties tab. And if you click here, you see this is the active camera in the moment, shot 1. If you want to change that, you can click here into this drop down and select shot camera 2 here. And now you see that this camera gets the fill triangle. And so always if you switch now the camera, you go into this active camera. Also you can drag and drop your camera if you like that here. Or you also can use a keyboard shortcut. You see my keyboard shortcuts here on the right side. So if you select now this camera and press Ctrl and 0 on the numpad, you will see that we are now switching into this shot camera number 2. And this shot camera number 2 is also now the active one. If I now select here shot camera number 1 here, and I go over the viewport, Ctrl 0 on the numpad again, you see that now shot camera number 1 is active and we are looking through this camera here. So let's drop out here by moving away. And the next question I always hear is how to manipulate now the position of a camera so that I exactly see what I want to see. So this viewport layout is really good because here we see now through the camera, which we have active here. And you will see that if I now use my mouse wheel, you'll see that I don't move the camera. It's still at this position here. I only see this passepartout here around and then the frame. And this frame is the frame which is rendered later. The format of this frame is set in the image properties here. You see this is full HD and it's 16:9 and this is exactly this frame. So if you zoom out or in, it doesn't change the format which you produce. It only helps you to understand what's going on. And if you change now the format, so I click here and drag over the two fields, then I release the mouse and say I want to produce an image which is 800 times 800. We'll see that the passepartout is now quadratic. Really easy to understand. This passepartout helps you to understand what is later in the image. But what if I want now to move my camera? You don't have to go always back here to the camera and move it from this viewport here. This is cumbersome. To do it more effectively, you can use an option which is inside of the N menu. So if you press here the N menu, it opens here, it's the menu on the right side. and you see many tabs here, depending on how many add-ons you have active in the moment. And in the View tab here is a really interesting option under View Lock here, and this is named Lock Camera to View. If you tick this, you will see that in my version of Blender, it's 2.82 beta, you will see that we get a red dotted line around the camera. So it's a good indicator. The older versions you don't get the red outline, I think, but it still works like expected. And if you have this tick now added here and you move yourself now inside of this viewport, you will see that you move the camera. So I know many trainees which have this lock always on because they say, that's exactly what I want. I always want to lock myself into the camera to move me around. So this is one solution of making it easier for coming from other 3D applications, but there are also keyboard shortcuts, and Blender is really good in it, so I want to demonstrate this really fast here. So I also can select the camera, which I've switched into. So I go here to the 0 key, I'm inside of the camera, but it's not selected in the moment. And if you now click here on this outline of my perspective, you will see that the camera is now active here. You can see it always on the left side here. If you now press your keyboard shortcut G, for example, for grab, because you want to move, you will see that I now can move my camera around. But what most people want is they want to zoom in and out, or better to say, not zoom. They want to move your camera closer to the object or far away, and it doesn't work here. So we can use the keyboard shortcuts which we normally use for translating objects. So if you press the G key and then press, for example, X, Y, or Z, you move in the axis. So a camera looks always in direction of Z, or better to say negative Z. But if you press Z now, you see that you use world Z. So you move up and down. So how to move now closer to the object or far away? For this, I escape this. I press G and press now 2 times Z, because then you are in the local Z mode. And now you can move closer and far away. So it's really the matter of selecting here your outline, press G, 2 times Z, and then you move closer or farther away, G again to move yourself here, and same is for rotation. So this is also a really useful technique. I now want to show you some really nice options which you can use inside of the viewport here. And for this matter, I make a little bit more space here. So, and what I want to do here is I want to place a camera into the look I have in the moment in the viewport. So I want, for example, that I have now a camera, my active camera here, exactly looking in this direction here. You remember the keyboard shortcut which I taught you, Control numpad 0, which switch the camera, the active camera. If you now add also the Option key, you have now a placement option. Let's try this. Control, Alt, and numpad 0. And you see, in the moment I do that, you switch into the camera, in your active camera, but the active camera is positioned exactly where I was in my viewport. You see it here. Yeah, and the same thing happens if you, for example, go now to this direction here. I say, oh, this is a cool direction. You can select your camera or not, because it always uses the active camera. Control, Alt, 0, and here we are. And then you can place yourself a little bit better here inside of the view. Also, there are some really interesting options here in the View menu. So if you go to the View menu, you see here a menu which is named Align View. And here you also see the keyboard shortcut which I told you. So Option, Control, numpad 0, Align Active Camera to the view which you're in. There's another one which doesn't have a keyboard shortcut in the moment, which is Align the active camera to selected. And this is really interesting. So if you see what this camera here sees in the moment, it's exactly that here. You see that I don't see the whole monitor anymore. What I want to see is the whole monitor, for example. So what I can do now is I select the monitor here in my viewport, and then I go to View, Align View, Align Active Camera to Selected. And what now the camera does is it frames the object inside of the camera view. Really useful, and sometimes I map this to a keyboard shortcut for myself, so it's much faster to position myself here. Let's talk now a little bit about these cameras which I have. And the first thing I want to do is I switch my camera here. So I go into this camera here, Control-0 to make it active. Now I don't see what I want. So what I want, for example, is let's search a nice view. For example, here from the right side, Control-Alt-0 to place it, G 2 times Z to make some adjustments here. Okay, this is the camera shot number 2. And if you want, we can switch back to shot number 1, Control-0, and we have the look from the upside, G 2 times that, and maybe something like that. So now we can really see the difference between these two cameras. Now I can demonstrate you some really interesting helpers which we have. One of the helpers here is, for example, that I want always to see which camera I'm in, because later we want to animate the camera. So these options you find on the camera themselves. So if you select the camera, you have here camera options, so this little camera icon. And if you look through all these options, we will talk about some of these in a moment. We go here to the viewport display. And if you are here, you see our friend the Passepartout. This is this one here. You can change it if you like in the opacity, so that it's more obvious what you later render or not. And you also have here some options which you can tick. And what I use to tick all the time is name. So I tick it for this camera and also for this camera. And then you see here on the left side the name of your shot camera. And so you never lose track which camera is active in the moment. So I'm in the moment in shot camera 1. If I select here now shot camera 2, Control-0 on my numpad, I'm now in shot camera 2. I can select now the next camera and I'm back here. Really useful to do it like that. Also, you know maybe from your applications in C4D that sometimes you want to have compositing helpers. They are here, compositing guides. So if you open this up, you can have a center here inside of your camera view. I'm really used to the rule of thirds here. So you can add the thirds inside here, but there are also some other really interesting options you can use if you like that. So these are the compositing helpers. Another question which now arises normally is, okay, I have now a shot, I have 2 cameras. Can I switch the cameras while I'm rendering? Because we've heard that we always render the camera which is here inside of the scene properties. Here, shot 1. What if I want to switch it? For example, I want to make a pseudo animation 2 frames. In frame 1, I want to render camera 1. In frame 2, I want to render camera 2. Or you want to have a cutscene or something like that. For doing that, most people try in my trainings to hover over this field and press the I key for setting a keyframe. But you will see it doesn't work. You see, camera property cannot be animated. So frustrating. To do that correctly, we need our timeline here. And inside of the timeline, if you scrub here around, you can set markers with the M key. But there is a special kind of marker which you can use. And this kind of marker is a bind camera marker. You can go into the markers menu here and you see the keyboard shortcut for bind camera to markers is Control-B, which means now you select the camera. An important thing is you don't need to be in the camera. So I switch out of the camera with numpad 0 so to make it really clear. So I'm outside of the camera, but I selected shot 1. I hover my mouse over the timeline. This is also important. You don't hover here over one of the viewports. You go over here the timeline and now press Control-B. And in the moment you do that, I make a little bit more space here. You see that we have now a marker which is a camera marker, and it's named shot 1. Now I can go, for example, to frame 50 because I now want to switch into camera number 2. I have to select it. So here, this is shot camera number 2. And if you now hover over your timeline, Control B again in the lower part, then you see now this camera is active and we can go now into frame 100. I select shot camera 1 again. I go into the lower part of the timeline, Control B again. So we have now 3 markers here for a camera switch. Now we can press the 0 key on our numpad, and if we now scrub here, you see that we are now switching cameras and have different kind of views, and the same thing happens here inside of our scene properties. So now you know that, how to get rid of these markers. You can select them and press the X key and delete the markers here. So it's really like at every point inside of Blender, the X key deletes. Okay. Last thing I want to talk about is the camera widget itself. So this is a really useful one. And for this, I want to see the rendered view. In the moment we are here in the material preview mode. So I go into the render mode, and in the moment I use here cycles, but you also can use it here in Eevee. So I go first into Eevee because it's faster. Okay, here we are. And then we take a closer look to the camera. I can scale it a little bit so that you see it better here inside of my viewport. And what I want to do is I want to talk about this little interesting yellow line which is around the camera. You see, it's something different. The camera is this shape here with a triangle, but this yellow thing is interesting. And if you click the yellow thing here and we go into the camera properties, I close here a little bit stuff so that you see it better. You see that we have now in the moment a focal length of 50 millimeters. So it's a normal lens. If you now grab this yellow thing and drag it, you see that you now change your focal length of your camera. This is really cool. So you can work interactively with the help of this widget, changing focal length. There's another helper which you can activate. So this helper is not there by default. So you go into your viewport displays, you know this menu now, and you go here and tick limits. And in the limits, you now see this cross here. And if you hover over the cross, you see it highlights now. And this cross here shows you an option which you find under depth of field. If you open this up, you see here the focal distance. It's at the moment grayed out because I haven't activated it yet, but it also works in the deactivated state. We have now a focal distance of 10 meters. And if you now grab this here around, you see you change now here the focal distance. It makes more sense to have now depth of field activated. So I activate this, and to really have a nice depth of field effect, you need an aperture which suits the scene. So I open it here really ridiculous so that we really can see what's going on. So I open it to 0.5, but it's only for demonstration's sakes. And now you see that with this distance, the size of the objects and the focal point at this point here, we get a really blurred image. And if you now move this widget closer to your object, you now see that thanks to Eevee, I can see the change of the depth of field fluently. And of course, the depth of field which you set here, I move it a little bit back here, also works in cycles. I hope this helps you to understand a little bit better how cameras inside of Blender work and how you get your first clicks around. If you have more questions, please let me know. I want to help you, if you're coming from Cinema 4D or another 3D application, understand Blender better. My name is Helge Maus from Pixeltrain. Have fun.